Good day and welcome to How to Change. Going to start today's episode off with good news and bad news. The bad news is I lost my co-host. The good news is, at least for this episode, I have a very capable replacement. Andrew, welcome.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So, for those that may not know, which is probably most of my audience, but hopefully that will change soon, Andrew is one of the founders of an organization called ChangeEngine that I'm pretty excited about. And I asked Andrew to join because, of course, we're here to talk about change. And what better person and organization to talk about change than somebody who started an organization called ChangeEngine? And so I've asked Andrew to join, and I've got a couple questions that I'm going to tee up to him in terms of what ChangeEngine is all about, so you can understand both the organization and also kind of Andrew's perspective on change and why this is important to him. So you have another perspective beyond mine and Robin's. So, Andrew, with that being said, let's talk about ChangeEngine. What's your mission statement? Why does ChangeEngine exist?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, at ChangeEngine, we noticed a few different patterns in the market, which actually came to the birth of ChangeEngine. And one of those is I've actually spent half of my career in marketing tech and the other half in people tech. And thinking about the employee as the internal customer, where each different internal customer has different moments in their life cycle. They have, different points at which they get recognized. They have different ways that they get onboarded. All of this is incredibly hard for organizations to manage in this distributed workplace. And what we found as co-founders is that a lot of innovation was happening on the customer experience side, where they're very well equipped with the latest and greatest tools in order to really tailor toward the customer experience. But when you look at the employee life cycle and the employee journey, it's all being done manually today. There's calendar reminders being set. There's a lot of content being produced that's quite manual. And we're really merging marketing and people so that we can bring the best of both worlds. You get the visual design that employees are 6 times more likely to remember. And employees learn from different mediums and by different content as well. So plain text is just not cutting it, rolling out change in today's age. And then that's paired with subject matter expertise on how to roll out employee communications programs. And that's really our mission. How can we bring that same level of innovation that's happening on one side of the fence in customer experience to the employee experience?
Sounds pretty simple.
It is very simple. It's a very simple statement with a very complex way to solve it as well.
People might be complex. I'm not sure, but some people would say people are complex. No, I love it. It's funny because as somebody who spent a lot of my career in IT, I think that IT in particular, but in general, most organizations, to your point, don't do a good job with that internal marketing, if you will. And I think your tool is a big aspect of that. So, and again, transparently for the audience, Andrew and I have known each other for a little bit, but as I was thinking about this, and again, particularly, without having Andrew do a demo, which, he and his team will be more than happy if you reach out to me. I'll get you connected and you can see a demo of the product. It's awesome. You can go to their website, and I'll have Andrew provide all the information later, or we'll add it to the podcast after the fact. But let's talk about how you guys handle change internally as an example of what organizations could aspire to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a company of about 30 to 35 employees. We're across 3 main geos in San Francisco, London, and Guadalajara. And the way that we think about it, there are 2 approaches. There's top-down change and there's bottoms-up change. We've found at ChangeEngine that top-down, it's kind of a little bit more old school. Getting those types of things adopted without the buy-in of managers and employees can prove to be very, very challenging. What we feel here at ChangeEngine is that employees need to feel part of something bigger than themselves. And that's the most important thing. And by having employees contribute their ideas, that's how we grow as an organization. We're a big fan of, if you've heard of Ray Dalio, his book Principles, in the book, it really talks about having an idea meritocracy where what he does at Bridgewater is he encourages every employee to come to the table with feedback and ideas. And then what they do is they choose the best ones, those win, they go heads down and they go execute. And I think getting that level of buy-in, bottoms up by really talking to employees, talking to managers, and finding the root of different issues and having everyone agree on that from a principal perspective makes it so that all of the other dominoes fall in place just a ton easier.
It's funny. I promise I hadn't thought about this until we had this conversation, but in my business, a lot of times what we're dealing with is adoption issues with new systems. And one of the things the conversations that we frequently have with our clients is, yeah, management knows what they want, right? It's all good. But what about the employee? What about that end user's experience and what they want? And so even though what I'm doing day in and day out is different than what you're doing day in and day out, I think that philosophy is really, really important in terms of top down works to an extent, but really having bottom up buy-in and engagement is so critical for anything you do in a successful organization. So I think it's awesome the way that you've structured that. The other kind of little tangent that I want to make in that is what I just said is, to me, what I see a lot of times in organizations is getting leadership to accept the bottom up versus the traditional top down is sometimes a bigger lift than getting people involved and engaged, because it's a different way of leading and managing. And old school managers, right, are not always receptive to these new ideas. And so we'll come back to that if we have time. It's hard maybe to boil it down to just a couple. I'll say three. It doesn't have to be exactly three, but if from your perspective, when you think about organizational change management, what are the most important factors that you think organizations need to consider in order to be successful on a regular basis?
Yeah, the way that we think about things is there are different tools that companies can use. Currently, companies are using quite a lot of listening tools, surveying their employees, getting a pulse on where they're at, running engagement surveys. And these types of tools do a great job at capturing what are our employees saying. But what we believe is that it's just as important to be able to understand how are employees responding to communications and what are they doing? What are their actions showing? And I think that's a really important part about rolling out change management is understanding, the sentiment and also understanding the series of actions that have happened after you make, a major announcement or you're rolling out a new sales playbook and how reps are adjusting to that and so on and so forth. I also think that creating the right content is very important as well. Gone are the days where you can announce something and it's plain text and an employee sees it once and then that's it. We live in this day and age where it's very hard to captivate anyone's attention. And so for us to captivate our employees' attention for 30 seconds or less, companies need to get really creative with the content that they're creating. What we found is that employees are 6 times more likely to remember visuals over verbal or written communication. So whenever you're rolling something out internally, having that visual, it's almost like the message is in the visual and then the text is supporting the message. And in that way, the information can be a little bit more snack-sized bits of content rather than hitting somebody over the head with a policy that they're not going to read in that moment as well. And then third, I think repetition is key, but we all don't have the time to be doing that all of the time. Like, in general, people take 7 to 8 times of hearing something, experiencing it before it truly starts to embed to muscle memory. But being able to do that, like amongst all employees, starts to become physically impossible. And so really, like, I think the reinforcement of programs is really huge. Like time and time again, like we've heard of like program killers where companies will spend 3 to 6 months planning a program. For example, employee referrals. They might roll out the program and receive a spike in employee referrals for the first 30 days. And 15 to 20% of employees are participating. And then 60 to 90 days later, it gets swept under the rug. And employees are like, I didn't even know we had that. So that's a result of, the lack of reinforcement of these programs. And the way that we think about a program, it's an internal product and your employee is the internal customer. of the product. And our goal is to increase the adoption of all of these programs and ensure that employees know that they exist, they're aware of them, and they're participating in the ones that they like. So those are three different things that we consider in change management as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So a couple of really important numbers that you just said there, right? 6 times more likely on a visual than text. That's a big number. Like, I think that's, to me, if I'm the audience, that's a takeaway that I definitely want to cling to. And I think the repetition, like you said, it's like anything, whether it's, I have this conversation with my kids all the time about sports, right? You got to practice to get good. And I think it's true of anything that you're doing. And to your point, you get that initial, a shiny new object and gets people's attention for a little bit. But if you don't have a process in place to keep reminding people and put it in front of them and hopefully, grow the concept, or in this case, the program internally, you're only going to get so much success. So great points. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Before I turn it over to you a little bit to talk a little bit more about ChangeEngine and in particular what you guys do and what you offer, I have to ask based on what you do. So do you have any good, it can either be a horror story or a success story. Do you have any good stories of things that you've seen in an organization, whether it's a client or somewhere you worked before, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. We don't need to name names. I just, knowing what you do and what your organization does, I'm like, he's got to have something good.
Yeah. I think the horror stories are the ones that you learn from the most. They're very, very memorable, and it's almost like touching a hot stove. You're like, ooh, okay, I was burned from that. Well, I shouldn't do that again. But there are a few pitfalls to change management for everyone to be aware of. And some of the ones that we've seen are things like rolling out the change before getting the manager buy-in. So if managers are not aware, it's almost like they're getting caught like a deer in headlights. And the first person that the employee goes to is their direct manager.
Sure.
So that's really where things can fall apart. And we've definitely seen, like in mergers and acquisition situations, that problem magnifies so much, because not only are you dealing with managers of one company, now you're dealing with managers of 5 companies. So that's definitely one that we've seen as kind of a change management pitfall to look out for, a speed bump, if you will. The other thing that we've seen are some companies looking at change as a one and done, instead of thinking about it as a full end-to-end campaign that's going to take lots of time. Some change can take years, some change can take weeks, some change can take quarters, but I think everyone needs to equip themselves with the right expectation of how people adopt change and manage it and all of that. And we believe that with any change, it requires primers. So there's a date that you might announce the change, but primers are incredibly important to roll out and kind of cascade the change throughout the organization before you launch it. So then on the day of, it's clear, it's timely, and it has a cadence to where it's reinforced for the next 6 to 8 weeks. Then it could be announced quarterly thereafter. And we always need to make sure that we close the loop on the results as well. And then third, and this one is quite interesting, but I feel like if a company is not recognizing the early adopters of change and leveraging them as an internal case study to say, hey, we rolled out this program and so from this department, they were the first ones to participate and even do like an internal testimonial about them speaking about what happened, how easy it was, all of that kind of stuff. Like that really helps to emulate the voice of the employee and make sure that other employees can understand why this change is happening. And, change is a good thing. It means that companies are growing. It means that they're evolving. But then, just going through the things to make sure that the change happens smoothly, it's important to avoid some of those different pitfalls.
Awesome. Thank you. Great lessons. I think we could talk all day. I know you have limited time and I don't want this thing to get too long anyway. So I do want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the organization, about ChangeEngine, what your product is and kind of what you do. I don't know how you want to do that. I promised for the audience, we didn't practice this, and I don't like to practice it, right? I want to give you an opportunity to talk about things from your perspective and what you think is good for the audience to know about your organization and why you exist and what you do.
Yeah, certainly. Well, my co-founders and I built ChangeEngine because we really want to up-level employee comms across the entire industry. And we really believe in the abundance mentality. There's a lot of opportunity out there for everybody, and we're constantly releasing open tools that anybody could use free of charge, because we are really adamant about companies being able to improve their communication strategy, and give them the content that they need in order to do so as well. It's very much so how marketing, there is content marketing. And that's when marketeers really figured out that, hey, if I'm prospecting and I have a 6 to 7 step sequence, the real thing is that I want to add value to my prospect and deliver them thoughtful content that they find useful. But the same thing applies to the employee experience, except there needs to be a people content strategy. And so much of the time, HR and people leaders are not marketers and they're not designers. So we created the platform to really be a creator tool for people leaders. So they could be. And within a matter of seconds, they can use a template of ours, and they could have a best practice that we learned working with Google on how to deploy their referral programs. Or they could leverage our AI, and we can write a communication in their own personalized tone. They could pair that with an image. And instead of them taking 4 hours to do that, do all the research, the copywriting, and the design, that's exactly what ChangeEngine does for them. And for us, what we've seen in this highly distributed workplace that we live in today, where it's hybrid and remote, it's become more difficult than ever. Like if you think about Martech's law, how technology is changing in an exponential curve, but organizations are only able to change on a linear curve. If we could close that gap just a little bit and increase the rate at which companies can change by an incremental percentage, that causes this huge ripple within the entire industry. And so for us, it's all about bridging that gap.
And I think to that point, right, it's really critical because, if you're in a competitive space, and who's not these days, right? If you can be just a little bit, if you can be 1% closer to that curve than your competitors, you've got an advantage. Maybe it's, a limited time advantage, but you've got an advantage. So I think the closer you can get to that and the faster you can make your organization move and adapt to that new technology or that new whatever, and I think I'm still at the point where it's hundreds. I don't think I've worked with 1,000 companies yet. It's probably getting close. I should do a better job of keeping track. But I guarantee you that it's far less than 5% of all the organizations I've ever worked with that truly had, like, where I went in and said, oh my gosh, their change management program is unbelievable. I've worked with a few that I was really impressed with, but it's only a few. Very, very few organizations historically have found this to be a focus point. And I think, to your point, with the pace of change today, it's so much more important than it was 20 years ago. And so, that's how I bumped into you and your organization. And I think if nothing else, I'll encourage the listeners to go check out changeengine.com and see what's on the website and the free tools that are out there. And again, there's a button right on the homepage where you can request a demo. But I absolutely love what you and your team are doing, and I just feel like it's necessary to try and communicate it to as many folks as possible. So even if just a couple listeners come in and get this and get something out of it, it was certainly worth my time. I hope it was worth your time, but I truly appreciate your time, Andrew. I know you got a million things going on, and I'm just excited to get to spend some time with you and hopefully get the message out to some folks and maybe improve some firms.
Likewise, Mike. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you, sir. Take care. Don't be a stranger.
Take care, Mike.